In less than 12 months, a business went from £44,000 in total assets to north of £1.3 million. That is not some side hustle quietly turning a corner. That is an empire being assembled in a field full of mud and confusion. And the whole thing traces back to a man who could barely operate a tractor buying a £6 million farm while the world was falling apart financially. A farm that now sits at the center of a rural business machine worth somewhere around $12 million. This is the story of how Jeremy Clarkson did something almost everyone said was impossible. October 2008. The global economy is in freefall. Lehman Brothers has just collapsed. Banks are freezing up. Anyone with serious money is either selling everything they own or stuffing cash under a mattress. Clarkson chose a third option. While the city of London was descending into collective panic, he slipped quietly into Oxfordshire and bought 1,000 acres of farmland for £6 million. No press conference, no grand announcement, no blueprint, just a handshake, a set of keys, and a lot of ground he had absolutely no idea what to do with. It looked insane at the time. This was the man the world associated with V12 engines, transatlantic arguments, and very loud opinions about hatchbacks. A farmer was the last thing anyone would have put on his CV, and when the numbers came in from year one, that impression seemed completely confirmed. The farm's profit for its entire first year was £144, not £144,000, not £14,400, £144, enough for a decent dinner at a middling restaurant, nothing more. Everyone laughed. And to be fair, it was funny. A man famous for driving Lamborghinis had bought a farm and made less money from it than most people earn in an afternoon. But what the laughter missed, and what makes this story genuinely worth telling, is what Clarkson had actually bought. Not just a farm, land. And farmland in Britain is not simply soil and hedgerows. It is one of the oldest, most legally protected wealth preservation tools in the country's financial history. At the time of purchase, agricultural property relief meant that qualifying farmland could pass between generations, free of inheritance tax. A detail Clarkson himself referenced in a 2009 newspaper column where he wrote that land was a better investment than any bank, and that the government wouldn't get any of his money when he died. Years later, he would walk that statement back, claiming the real reason he bought it was to shoot pheasant, and that the inheritance tax angle had just made better PR. Whatever the true motivation, the result was the same. The £6 million land purchase is now conservatively valued at around £12.5 million. Even without a single episode ever being filmed, even without a jar of honey ever being sold, the land alone had quietly doubled its value across 15 years. That is the foundation everything else is built on. But the explosion, the real one, came when Amazon got involved. When Clarkson's farm was first announced, British farming circles were skeptical. A TV presenter buying some Cotswolds land and stumbling through harvests for a camera crew sounded like the kind of thing that lasts one series and disappears. What the skeptics completely misjudged was what kind of show it actually was. This was not a celebrity making cheese on a hobby farm. This was a man genuinely trying to run a 1,000-acre arable operation in West Oxfordshire, growing barley, wheat, rapeseed, and oats, with no prior experience and no safety net beyond a very patient young man called Kaleb. And Amazon was paying for every single camera pointed at it. That is the detail that changes the entire business calculation. Every tractor malfunction was content. Every council refusal was a plotline. Every failed crop, every argument about drilling depth, every bureaucratic wall Clarkson ran into, all of it became programming that Amazon distributed to tens of millions of households without costing the farm a penny in marketing. Diddly Squat was not just a farm generating agricultural revenue, it was a set. And the set had a global audience. The show's numbers back this up completely. When Series 2 landed on Amazon Prime in February 2023, its first episode pulled 4.3 million viewers in 7 days on British TV sets alone, more than The Lord of the Rings. The Rings of Power had managed at its launch the previous year. It beat the Brit Awards in the weekly rankings. Series 3 went further still, pulling 5.1 million viewers in its opening week, and landing as the second most watched streaming show of all of 2024 in the UK, across every platform, beaten only by a Netflix thriller. Series 4, which aired in May 2025, averaged 4.4 million viewers per episode and became Amazon's biggest show of the year on British soil. The audience was not shrinking, it was growing. Season by season, the show was building something that most brands spend decades and hundreds of millions of pounds trying to create: a loyal, emotionally invested following. That following is what built the farm shop into something completely out of proportion with its physical reality. Diddley Squat's shop began as what it looks like in the show: a converted shed selling potatoes, local vegetables, and whatever produce the farm happened to be growing that week. A hand-painted sign, a roughly patched-together counter, the kind of setup that, anywhere else in Oxfordshire, would sell a modest number of things to locals on a Saturday morning, and close by noon. Then the show aired, and the queue started forming at dawn. People drove for hours to buy a jar of honey from a shed in Chadlington. Not because it was the cheapest honey in England, not because the shop had extended hours or a loyalty card. They came because they had watched the farm exist in their living rooms, and buying something from Diddley Squat was a way of touching the story. A bag of potatoes became a souvenir. A bottle of farm sauce was a connection to a world they felt they knew intimately. The show had done something that no conventional retail marketing could have replicated. It had made strangers feel ownership over a place they had never visited. West Oxfordshire District Council's insistence that the shop could only sell locally sourced produce, a rule that was meant to limit what Clarkson could do commercially, ended up working entirely in his favor. It forced everything to feel genuinely local. It forced everything to feel real. And in a marketplace increasingly saturated with brands trying to manufacture authenticity, actual authenticity turned out to be worth more than any product extension could have provided. Within a year of the shop opening, the business jumped from £44,000 in assets to over $1.3 million. Not through venture capital, not through a celebrity licensing deal, through potatoes and honey and people wanting to stand somewhere they'd seen on a screen. The council battles, meanwhile, generated material that no PR team could have invented. West Oxfordshire District Council rejected Clarkson's application to convert a lambing shed into a restaurant. They refused his car park extensions. They shut down a pop-up bar and dining area he had opened without formal permission. For most businesses, serial planning refusals represent a slow financial strangulation. For a show that turned every obstacle into dramatic tension, each council letter was practically a gift. The restaurant shutdown became a 2-episode arc. The car park fight generated a planning appeal that itself became television. The council eventually had to issue a public statement clarifying that they were not acting as villains in a documentary, that they had legal responsibilities, and were working with the farm behind the scenes. It made no difference. Millions of viewers had already decided which side they were on. Even Clarkson himself understood the dynamic. He consistently called planning refusals dispiriting in the show, then discussed them in his Sunday Times column, which reached several million more readers. Each time West Oxfordshire said no, Diddley Squat got more famous. The farm's notoriety and its commercial appeal grew in direct proportion to the obstacles placed in front of it. Then there is Kaleb Cooper, and it would be a serious mistake to undercount his contribution to all of this. Kaleb Wayne Cooper was born in Chipping Norton in 1998 and started farming at 13, getting 3 chickens for his birthday and selling eggs around the neighborhood. By his own account, it was the business side of farming that drew him in first. The logic of it, the exchange of labor and land for money, and then the tractors and the animals came after. He had already been working on what would become Diddley Squat when it was under the management of a previous contractor, which means he knew that land better than Clarkson probably ever will. When Clarkson took over full management of the farm in 2019 and needed someone to actually make decisions, Kaleb was there. The relationship that developed between them, the seasoned young farmer and the wildly overconfident television presenter, turned out to be the engine of the show. Kaleb explains things to Clarkson the way you might explain things to a well-meaning uncle who insists he knows how to rewire the electrics. Patient, weary, occasionally furious, but always, underneath it, fond. What made that dynamic so compelling for viewers was that it was not performed. Kaleb was not cast for television personality. He was present because the farm needed someone who actually understood it. His exasperation was real. His knowledge was real. And audiences can always feel the difference between someone who is performing and someone who is simply being filmed. The knock-on effects of his profile have been substantial. He has published best-selling books, The World According to Kaleb, and sold out a UK theater tour with his one-man show of the same name. Hawkstone launched a cider product fronted by his name and face. His social following grew from nothing into a platform that agricultural campaigns would love to have access to. In Series 4, he took time away from the farm to run his tour, leaving a visible gap that reminded viewers how central he had become. And he has done all of this while maintaining a credibility that polished television personalities routinely lose. He still runs his own farming operation in Haythrop, still corrects Clarkson 5 times an episode without blinking, and still, famously, refuses to go to London. That refusal is not a quirk, it is the brand. It says, this person's world is the farm, and no amount of television money is going to change that. You cannot manufacture that kind of authenticity, and Kaleb Cooper didn't have to. He just showed up and was himself, and it turned out that was exactly what the show needed to be believed. Now, to Hawkstone. Because if Diddley Squat's farm shop is the foundation, Hawkstone is the part of this story that shifts the entire enterprise into a different financial category. The brewery had been operating quietly as the Cotswold Brewing Company, founded in 2004 by Richard and Emma Keane in Bourton-on-the-Water, Gloucestershire, for nearly 2 decades before Clarkson entered the picture. In 2021, Clarkson and entrepreneur Johnny Hornby bought a significant stake. The brewery was renamed, and Hawkstone Lager was born. The name came from a Neolithic standing stone near the farm, which tells you something about how seriously they were taking the local provenance angle from day one. The original branding ideas included the working title Lager McLagerface, which gives you a sense of how seriously Clarkson was initially taking the commercial dimension. Then they looked at what the actual production costs were going to be, and realized quickly that cheap joke lager was not going to be financially viable. The product shifted to a premium positioning, a 4.8% ABV lager brewed using barley grown on Diddley Squat and nearby farms, with a full flavor profile that reviewers consistently described as having more substance than standard supermarket alternatives. It won gold at the 2024 World Beer Awards, and was named country winner for England in the premium lager category. It was not just a celebrity name on a bottle. The product itself could hold the argument, and then the audience found it. In the year to March 2024, Hawkstone posted sales of £7.8 million. In the year to March 2025, that number had jumped to £21.3 million, nearly tripling in 12 months. That growth rate of 134% annually placed it 23rd on the Sunday Times 100 list of Britain's fastest-growing private companies, and specifically named it the fastest-growing brewer in the country. The brand was stocked in over 2,000 pubs and had secured listings in Waitrose, Morrison's, and Sainsbury's. Total equity in the business jumped from £432,512 to just over £3 million in a single financial year. Current assets went from £1.7 million to just under £5 million. Clarkson, characteristically, translated all of this into the language he is most comfortable with. Asked about his plans for the rest of 2025, he said he wanted to put Peroni out of business and achieve total domination of the British lager market. He was joking. Probably. The brewery had also expanded its range far beyond a single lager. Low alcohol options appeared, including what Clarkson described as Spa Lager, a fruit cider range launched, fronted by Kaleb Cooper's name, with blackberry, blackcurrant, and apple variants. Hawkstone produced experimental ales using British hops. A botanical gin followed. The range even survived a significant product recall in 2023, when a batch of cider was found to have over-fermented. Clarkson's response was to publicly own the mistake immediately and without qualification, and sales actually increased afterwards. The brand had built enough goodwill that its customers treated transparency about failure as a feature rather than a flaw. The reported approach from Carlsberg, rumored to be in the region of £50 million, is worth understanding in this context. Carlsberg is one of the largest brewing conglomerates on Earth, operating across dozens of markets, managing scores of brands. For them, buying Hawkstone would mean acquiring a rapidly growing British lager brand with genuine market momentum. For Hawkstone, such a deal would mean exactly one thing: the end of the story that makes it work. Strip away the farm, strip away the local supply chain, strip away the Standing Stone and the Cotswolds barley and Kaleb's name on the cider, and Clarkson arguing with a council planning officer in a village hall. And what you have left is a decent lager in a competitive market with no particular reason to exist over the alternatives. The story is not something you can sell separately from the product. The business model is the brand. They are the same thing. Clarkson's response to the Carlsberg reports was, as of last reporting, to keep growing, which, given that the trajectory shows no sign of slowing, seems like the correct decision. The farmer's dog sits at a different end of this operation, but serves an equally specific function in the flywheel. The pub opened in August 2024 in Asthall, Oxfordshire, after Clarkson spent approximately £1 million on the venture. It was built entirely around British produce, British beef, British spirits, British ingredients, at every stage of the supply chain, even when importing equivalents would have saved significant money. Clarkson himself described this as a brilliant method of converting £100 into approximately £94. The point was never pure food profitability. The point was to create another physical location where the diddly squat story could exist, where Hawkstone could be poured at full margin, and where the visual identity of everything Clarkson's operation represents could be lived in rather than just watched on a screen. Consider the logic of the machine when you lay it out plainly. Amazon funds the cameras. The show creates the audience. The audience seeks out diddly squat. The farm shop sells them the story in physical form. The story creates demand for Hawkstone. Hawkstone revenue funds the brewery's expansion. The pub extends the brand into hospitality and captures the margin on drinks. The pub also provides filming locations that create more content. The content brings more visitors. The visitors buy more products. Every element is feeding something else. No single part of it makes complete sense on its own. All of it together produces something that grows without a proportional increase in marketing spend, because the marketing and the product are the same activity. Then came the inheritance tax fight, and Clarkson walked straight into the center of it. In the autumn of 2024, Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced that from April 2026, agricultural assets worth more than £1 million would be subject to a 20% inheritance tax charge. For family farming operations across Britain, many of which carry significant land value on paper but operate on extremely thin actual margins, the policy was received as existential. The National Farmers Union organized what became one of the largest agricultural demonstrations in recent memory. On November 19, 2024, somewhere between 10,000 and 40,000 people gathered in Westminster. Estimates varied widely, but the mood was unambiguous. Clarkson arrived on a coach-branded diddly squat, flanked by Kaleb Cooper and Charlie Ireland. Amazon's production crew was filming. It was, simultaneously, a genuine political protest and content for Series 5. He was confronted live on camera by BBC journalist Victoria Derbyshire, who challenged him on reports that he had originally purchased the farm specifically to exploit agricultural inheritance tax relief. Clarkson batted the question away, told her it was classic BBC, and walked on. It made national news by the end of the day. Within 24 hours, he had spoken to The Times, acknowledged that the 2009 column where he'd written about avoiding inheritance tax had been better PR than the real reason. He'd apparently wanted somewhere to shoot, and moved the conversation back to the substance of the policy. Whether or not the original motivation matters, the effect of the protest was to draw him once again into a role he had not formally applied for, the face of British agriculture's political anxiety. The production crew filming at the protest was not an accident. In Series 5, which premiered in June 2026, the inheritance tax battle became a narrative thread. The farm itself was losing money on its actual crops. A 2025 drought had cut wheat yields by 30% and barley by 40%, producing a loss of 5,152 pounds on the farming operation against a projected profit of 37,000 pounds. The show did not hide this. It showed it. That is what it has always done: present the reality of farming economics without softening it for people who have never had to think about them before. Which brings up what is probably the most underappreciated achievement of this entire enterprise. In 2019, a large-scale survey found that only 26% of British respondents were aware of the basic seasonality of food production. Not its economics, not the complexity of soil management or subsidy structures, or the margin difference between wheat prices in July and September. Simply whether food grew at different times of year. The public relationship with where food comes from had, across generations of urbanization, reached a point where the people eating it and the people producing it existed in almost entirely separate worlds. Clarkson's farm changed that for several million people. Not comprehensively, not technically, but meaningfully. Viewers who had never given a thought to the cost of running a combine harvester or the difference between winter and spring barley were, across 5 series, absorbing these details. They watched Clarkson lose money in years when the weather turned wrong. They watched him navigate subsidy structures that changed with Brexit. They watched him fight planning committees over car parks and restaurant sheds. They learned, without being lectured, that the price of food in a supermarket represents one tiny visible point at the end of a chain of weather dependency, equipment costs, fuel prices, soil chemistry, and bureaucratic processes that most of us never see. And because they had watched it happen to someone they found entertaining, the information landed. When Clarkson stood outside Parliament in November 2024 and talked about inheritance tax and what it would mean for farming families, millions of people who watched the show already understood the context. They did not need an explainer. They had seen the margins. They had watched Charlie Ireland sit Clarkson down with a calculator and explain, very slowly, why the numbers did not add up. The show had built a bridge of comprehension that years of NFU campaigns and farming charity messaging had not managed to construct. That is not a commercial achievement, it is a cultural one, and it may outlast every other part of this story. When Clarkson was dismissed from the BBC after an incident involving a producer and a cold steak in 2015, the conventional read was that his career had hit its ceiling. He had spent over 2 decades as the most recognizable face in motoring television, built a global audience for Top Gear, and then thrown it away in a moment of spectacularly bad judgment. The general expectation was a period of managed decline. Books, touring, panel shows, gradually smaller stages. What actually happened was the BBC's loss became the most elaborate argument for farming as content that British television has ever produced. From the same field where he made 144 pounds in his first year, Clarkson built a brand empire that runs through land, retail, brewing, hospitality, and a television series that keeps breaking its own viewing records. The obstacles became the material, the failures became the story. The council planning battles, the subsidy confusion, the crop failures, the restaurant shutdown, the car park that needed an appeal to the planning inspectorate. None of it slowed the flywheel. All of it accelerated it. The land is worth £12.5 million. The brewery is generating over £21 million in annual sales. The shop is a destination that people plan journeys around. The pub is pouring Hawkstone at full margin while simultaneously generating filming locations. The show is in its 6th series and averaging over 4 million viewers per episode. And somewhere in Chipping Norton, Kaleb Cooper is driving a tractor across land he knew before the cameras arrived, correcting someone's decision about drilling depth, entirely unimpressed by any of it. The 144 pounds profit was supposed to be evidence that the whole thing was doomed. It turned out to be the first line of an origin story that nobody saw coming. The farm that produced almost nothing in year 1 became proof that the most powerful businesses are not built on scale from the start. They are built on a story that is real enough to survive scrutiny, real enough to outlast failure, real enough that the mistakes make it stronger rather than weaker. Nobody in Britain looked less likely to build something like this. A presenter from Doncaster, fired publicly by the BBC, photographed standing in mud, trying to remember which lever on a tractor did what. From that starting point, somehow, something impossible got built. And the most striking thing about it is this: the farm still barely makes money. The drought seasons still produce losses. The planning fights continue. The council still sends letters. The crops still fail when the weather decides they will. The farming operation at the center of all of this remains exactly what it was in 2008, genuinely, stubbornly hard. That difficulty is not a problem with the business model. It is the business model. The moment the farm starts running smoothly, the story stops being interesting. And the moment the story stops being interesting, the flywheel slows, the queue outside the shed gets shorter, the Hawkstone taps get pulled, and the whole machine loses the thing that makes it irreplaceable. The mud is not incidental. The mud is the point. And the impossible thing Jeremy Clarkson built is sitting right in the middle of it.